from our department, computer science department. He works in computational topology, computational geometry, and data visualization, and he will talk about scientific visualization.
Okay, you enjoy your coffee? Okay, hopefully you're awake. I'm going to, I mean, it's probably a long day. You start at 9, right? So just one more talk which is about gate, I see. I guess that should be of interest to all of you. But before that, maybe let me try and entertain you with some pictures, right? And hopefully you learn something, and then come back and read more about it, right? So this is going to be a topic that, while you would have seen from your school days, right, you may not have covered it in any formal way, right? So this is visualization, right? So let's look at the terms from the title one by one slowly, right? And by the time we are done with it, we should be done with our 1 hour, right? That's the idea, okay? So let's start with visualization. So then I'll talk about scientific, and then talk about how to get insight from data, right? So what is visualization? So it's a word in English. Where if you don't know what that means, where will you go and find? Google, okay. Let's be more specific, Wikipedia, right? So while I was preparing this talk, I did the same thing just so that I can see what Wikipedia says about visualization and whether I agree with it, right? And as usual, visualization is a very common word, right? It's used by different people to mean different things. So there is a disambiguation page, right? So how many of you have seen a disambiguation page on Wikipedia? Okay, so you know what I mean, right? And so there's a long list, and the first on the list is something called creative visualization, okay? So I went in and clicked on that to see what that means. So it says creative visualization, I'm just going to read this out, is the cognitive process of purposefully generating visual mental imagery with eyes open or closed. Okay, so emphasis on eyes open or closed. So it's essentially saying daydreaming, right? So this is definitely not what we do in our work in visualization, right? You will see us often staring in space or staring at the board, but it's not daydreaming. Or at least you would like you to think that it's not daydreaming. So this is so much. With this emphasis, I would think that there was something really deep about this. So there's also a book on creative visualization for dummies in case you don't know how to daydream. But more seriously, then I went down the list. There are more kind of more appropriate definitions, at least for this talk, right? So there is from the Wikipedia dictionary, right? You have a definition which says essentially that visualization is the visual representation of data, right? So very simple definition, right? You have data and you want to go from the data to a visual representation, so essentially pictures. So going from data to pictures, that is all visualization is about, right? And so we're going to try and understand that a little bit better today, okay? So more specifically, we cannot cover the whole of visualization, it's a vast area. So I will focus on what is called scientific visualization. So there is nothing more scientific about the visualization we are going to talk about today. This word scientific just refers to the fact that the data that we look at comes from more scientific domains, right? So science and engineering disciplines, right? So this is going to be the focus of the next 45 minutes or so. Okay, so by the way, I have slides prepared and all that, but I don't have to necessarily cover them all within that 1 hour, right? So if you have questions, please, I mean, I'll be more than happy to have discussion and not cover all the slides. So at any point of time, if you have a question or a comment or whatever, please just interrupt me, and then we can have a short discussion, okay? So this is the working definition that we will be using, right? So visual representation of data. So let's understand data a little bit better, scientific data. So when I say scientific data, I mean data that can come from various sources like simulations of physical phenomena, right? So simulations of, for example, weather, climate, right? Simulations of, I don't know, rocket fuel going through a chamber, right? Simulation of water as it rushes through the pipe, right? And doesn't come out of your tap. Measurements from different devices, right? Imaging devices. For example, what kind of imaging devices have you seen? A microscope. What else? Telescope maybe. Yeah. So these are also recording. MRI, CT, which there's some some cheat sheet here, and maybe something else that I missed. Sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah, PET. Yes. Yeah. Anything else? Sorry? Heat maps. Heat map is a way to display or understand what the data is all about. So we are talking about imaging devices. What other devices? X-rays, okay. So some imaging device that all of you have. A camera, right? Okay, that should be the first thing that you say, right? Sensing devices. Sensing devices such as, I don't know, heat sensors, pressure sensors, gyroscope, right? All kinds of sensing devices. All of them generate data, right? And all of them generate data, and we are particularly interested in cases where they generate data over a spatial domain, right? So let's take some examples, right? So the images are not perfect, but let's work with them. So by the way, the images that I show you today, all the pictures I show you today, unless explicitly mentioned, they are all being generated by our group, right? So these are visualizations that we have created to understand different data. So let's switch this on. So some examples of data and from sources, right? So near infrared microscopy, right? So this is used in this particular example to image the breast in order to see if there are tumors or not, right? So this is electron microscopy, right? So not optical, but electron microscopy, which is used to look at, among other applications, it's used to look at the structure of large molecules, right? CT or MRI scans, if you've ever had a fracture, you know, or which is sophisticated, then you know what this means, right? Or if you've, and then data from simulations. So atomistic simulations, which essentially means that you simulate on a per atom basis. So this could be used to understand so-called pore networks. So if you have a sponge-like material, if you want to understand how strong this sponge is, right, then it really depends on the pores or the empty space inside, right? So if you want to understand that pore network in this sponge-like material, then you first get the data from atomistic simulations, and then you visualize that pore network after you get the data, right? Or the data source could be a simulation which essentially gives you the density distribution, electron density distribution in silicium. You all know what silicium is, right? Silicon, so silicium, right? So so this is the crystal structure for silicium. So all these data are, what is common is that the domain of this data is spatial, right? So just to contrast, an example for data where the domain is not spatial. That is a question. Sorry. Sorry? A camera, partially, but you still have a 2D domain, right? For every point on the plane, you have a pixel intensity, right? So it is 2D, but still spatial, right? So 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3 dimension, all spatial. Audio, yeah? Question? Okay, a list of questions. Okay. that is some data, right? So it's some repository, right? Email logs, right? Different kinds of kind of packet information, right? That flows through the network. There is no necessary spatial context to it, right? So it's just going from some IP address to another IP address, right? So those are all examples of non-spatial data. So just to contrast, we are going to look at spatial data and look at techniques for understanding spatial data, okay? So in all these cases, let's look at some mathematical representation, right? This is a very simple representation, nothing sophisticated here. So all this data are going to be represented as a function from a domain which takes real values for now, right? So essentially that's why scalar data, real value data, right? So for today's talk, we are going to focus only on scalar data, right? Again, to contrast it, you could have vector data, right? Like velocities or force, right? Where the domain may still be spatial, but this is not real valued anymore, right? Okay, so this is simple enough that we can cover a lot within the next half an hour to 40 minutes or so, right? Okay, so let's now talk about what visualization means, right? Visualization of this data means, right? So essentially when I say that I work on methods for scientific visualization, I am essentially studying and then developing also methods to understand underlying phenomena, right? I don't want to just present the data, I want to present it so that I understand what's happening, right? I want to understand where the tumor is, I want to understand how the flow kind of really goes along the pipe, right? And I also want to communicate whatever I have found. If I have possibly found some interesting pattern, some interesting artifact, I want to highlight that with a visualization. So again, you have seen this in your textbooks, right? Right from your school days, if you to understand different biological concepts or other concepts, you have seen illustrations. Those are all visualizations. They are handcrafted visualizations. We are going to talk about computer-generated visualizations, right? So this is essentially what scientific visualization is all about. And as is clear, the application domains is, I mean, anybody who generates data, right, is our client, right? So from medical imaging to crystallography, biology, right, CFD, climate science, material science, cosmology, right? Several applications, right? So it's a much longer list than what I have space here in the slide. Okay. So this is just to set the stage. So now what exactly is visualization? What do I do when I design a visualization, right? So let's look at that in one slide, right? So it's going to be a collection of summaries only, right? So we can only cover so much today. So like I said, data to pictures, right? Left to right, data to pictures. Let's look at the 4 stages in this pipeline that takes us from data to pictures. So you'll get an idea about various visualization techniques that have to be developed, right? So you go for the first stage is data analysis, kind of a generic term again, which takes you from raw data to prepared data, right? So what kind of techniques could be involved here? Maybe you have seen already a lecture on something like this, right? Which takes you from raw data to prepared data. Some machine learning techniques, okay. To do what? These are techniques. To do what? Example. Structuring the data, right? So the data may be unstructured all over the place. You want to, first of all, you may have, let's take the example of somebody getting a very involved fracture. You may have 2 modalities, both CT and MRI, to scan the same foot. But you have 2 data, you want to put it together, right? So in that sense, it's unstructured. You want to structure it to register it together. That's an important first step. Somebody else had another example. Same, unstructured to structured, okay. Anything else? You are measuring something, right? What is the first thing that comes to mind? You're not going to get clean data. You're going to get noise, right? So you have to somehow denoise, right? You're going to have missing values, right? You have to fill them in or have a plan to do something about those missing values, right? So all that falls into here, right? So you get some prepared data. So this is a long list of techniques, areas, right, that have contributed to this step. So then prepare data to focus data. You may have imaged the whole body, but then you're interested only in the foot, right? So you want to identify the region of interest, right? So you need you need good ways to store your data, right? Good data structures to store your data so that you can quickly compute subsets, right, or regions of interest. So essentially that's the filtering step, right? Going from prepared data to focus data. And kind of the most important step that for visualization is going from focus data to geometric data. Till now we are working with data. So if it is some scan, you have some density distributed over space. If you are measuring temperature in this room, then you have at every point some temperature values, right? So how do you create a picture out of it, right? In order to create a picture, first you have to create some geometry. So that is the mapping stage, right? And there are many techniques. We will actually look at 1 or 2 techniques today, right, from this mapping stage. And once you have geometry, right, so geometry could be any surface, any lines, points, chairs, all of you are geometry, right? So how do you go from geometry to images? Your camera, right, but a virtual camera. So you do the rendering, and this is something that I'm guessing all of you have are doing your bachelor's in computer science. Anybody doing bachelor's in non-CS? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, a few. But you may still have heard that the branch of or computer science that focuses on this, going from geometry to images, using the computer. It's called computer graphics, right? So how many have done a course on computer graphics already? Okay, how many will be doing it in the next year? Okay, about half. Do you know if you will be, so how many will be doing graphics programming and not just doing theory in graphics? Okay, good. So make sure that you take that opportunity to do some really cool renderings, right? Much more than what your syllabus allows you to kind of explore. The reason I say you can do a lot of this because there are very nice, easy libraries available that you can just quickly use to generate some very good graphics, maybe even similar to the ones that we can generate now, right? That you see on the slides here. So this the focus of this last stage is computer graphics, right? So visualization is just 1 minute. I'm sorry. Visualization is essentially covers graphics as the final stage, right? Or alternatively, you can even think of visualization as an application of graphics, right? Yeah, go ahead. Right. So, actually, today's talk is going to be mostly focused about that stage, right? So I will go over some simple techniques. I have just 1 or 2 slides. I will go over them, right? Just some patience, please. Yeah. Okay. So, actually, just 1 slide, and then I'll go to that. I want to first indicate why this is still challenging. I mean, we've had data for a long time. Right, so people have had a lot of chance to design visualization techniques. Why is this still challenging, right? So what are some current research challenges? What are some current development challenges, right, in visualization? So you all agree that we have been doing visualization for a long time, right? You have been plotting graphs, right? That's visualization, right? So we have been doing visualization for a long time. It's still challenging because data is getting very large, right? So large that it's even difficult to think about doing any sophisticated processing on it to do visualization, right? And it's high fidelity, right? High resolution. You have a lot of features that you can capture now because you have a lot of processing power, right? Your sensors capabilities are tremendous, right? So you get very high resolution images. You have very high fidelity simulations of things like combustion, right? Where you can clearly say where each ignition happens. So you take a simulation of an internal combustion engine, you know exactly where each ignition happens, right? And then how the different flames, they merge, right? And how they die out, right? So you have really high resolution simulations. Now you want to understand what's happening, right? Assuming that somebody has done all the hard work to generate the data, you have to understand what that data is all about. Otherwise, there's no point in generating the data, right? So earlier visualizations could generate something like this, what you see on the right, which is a nice visual which shows, okay, nice flames, right? But if you want to do some systematic study, then it becomes difficult to just work with this, right? What you really need is what I was trying to describe, those basins where fire extinguishes, right? And then how these extinguishing patterns propagate, right? So that tells you how the whole fuel is consumed within the internal combustion engine. So you don't see that from far, I'm sure. So there are some, on the left is a set of basins explicitly computed and connected via a network, right? So this network tells you how this combustion is propagating over time, right? While this may not look as kind of beautiful as this, what you see on the left is more useful visualization, right? Something that helps understand. Yes, try to switch this light off. Okay. So that helps you understand what is happening with this combustion, right? So another example is with respect to another challenge, which is you want to integrate sophisticated analysis techniques that we have nowadays, right? With not just machine learning, but geometric analysis and so on, together with the visualization. So here you want to use, you don't want to show the data as it is, right? You want to use abstract representations to show the data. And you want to allow for kind of intuitive ways to explore your data, right? So that you can understand it better. So here's an example that helps understand what all this really means, right? So what you see here is a volume rendering, what's called a volume rendering of a CT scan, right, of the human body. Volume rendering in the sense you see the entire volume by mapping or the density to some color and of course transparency so that you can see through, right? So this is volume rendering, which has also been developed within the visualization community, and it's well understood, right? But if I just do this volume rendering, I don't really understand. So if I want to look only at the organs, or I want to look only at the bone structure, right? I want to identify if there are any deformities and so on, right? I want to highlight those regions of interest. With volume rendering, it's a little bit difficult to do that, right? So what I want eventually is an image like that, right? You know, and it's difficult to go from here to here. The reason is that I cannot intuitively specify that I want to focus on the bones, I want to focus on the colon structure and so on. It's very difficult to tell that to your visualization tool in an intuitive way, right? What you need is some kind of a abstract representation. So this is what I mean by visual abstraction. There is an abstract graph that we will talk about a little bit today called the Reeb graph or the contour tree, where individual arcs in this tree or graph in general corresponds to interesting features in your data. So how is that useful? This allows me to intuitively explore. So I can select individual arcs. So you see some of these arcs shaded pink. They are highlighted, and that means that they are selected, and the corresponding volumes are actually highlighted in the volume rendering, right? So in this case, actually 3 arcs have been selected, and there are a few others which you don't see are also selected. And so the corresponding structures are the bones, right? You see the bones here in the ribs, and the lungs, and also the colon, right? So those are highlighted. So the data contains the rest of the body also, right? But you are highlighting parts that you would like to show your user, okay? So this is a pictorial representation of what is possible as of today, right? Okay. So let's now talk about the mapping stage, okay? So we will start with things that are very simple, right? And kind of obvious now, right, in hindsight. So what do you do when you want to visualize a 2D function? So the domain is essentially R2, right? just the plane. How do you visualize a 2D function? And
the x and the y axis represent the
right.
and the z axis represent the actual value of the function.
The z-axis represents the value. So x and y is your domain, and the z-axis corresponds to the value of the function. So what do you get eventually? You want geometry. What geometry do you get?
So you get some three-dimensional planar kind of a thing.
Surface, right? So three-dimensional surface, right? It's three-dimensional because it's embedded in 3D. But I always try to correct people by saying that surface is essentially two-dimensional, right? It's just that in our minds we can always see it only in 3D. Inherently, the surface is two-dimensional always, right? So a surface plot, right? If you use MATLAB, you know how to do this, right? It's very easy, and that's the obvious way to visualize a 2D function. But you can also map colors, right? So pseudo colors, right? In this case, low values are mapped to red, and high values are mapped to more golden, right, and yellow, right? Yeah. Can I elaborate on this? Exactly. So this is the answer. This is the surface. Right, but when every point on the surface can be represented using two coordinates, hence two-dimensional. No, that is the scalar function. That is f. The surface as such, if you just think of the surface, right, every point can be described using two values, right? No, it depends on how you pass. So there's something called parameterization, right? If you've seen that, then that's essentially the answer, right? So a surface, if you think about it, right, is one where every point can be described using two parameters, right? Now, if you want to think about how to embed it in 3D space, then you distinguish between different kinds of surfaces. So for me, let's take a simple example of maybe this helps. A sphere, right? Unit sphere is the same whether you place it at origin or you place it at -3, -3, -3. For me, these two surfaces are the same, right? Inherently, they are the same. But when you embed it in 3D, for you, they are different, right? But inherently, they are two-dimensional objects. That's what I mean, right? Okay, so the first thing that we did, surface plot, that exactly is an example of the mapping stage, right? Going from your data to a surface, right? Okay, and in addition, you can also use colors to enhance that surface, right? Okay, so that's a color map, essentially something you have done. But in addition, there is in 2D, there is another technique that is quite useful to present, at least in 2D, so that we can extend to 3D. Right? These are called contour plots, right? So a contour plot is something like this, something that you may have seen often when you're going trekking or something like that, right? You see a plot like this of elevation, right, of a terrain. So you see these curves. Each curve essentially is a pre-image of a particular altitude or a particular elevation. So if you have a small curve here that corresponds to either a peak or a valley, right? So these are called contour plots or isocontours. This is also a mapping, right? You go from your scalar values to some geometry. In this case, the geometry is a collection of curves, right? Okay. So how do I extend this to 3D? So the definition is still the same. The name changes to isosurface, not a contour anymore, not a curve anymore, but an isosurface. But it's still a pre-image of a given iso value or a real value, right? I give a particular height, you tell me all the points that belong to, that have the same height, right? So if I again go back to the CT data, what kind of isosurfaces would I get? For a small value, let's say 30, I would get a surface that looks like this. It can have many components, right? Slightly higher value, I get something like the foot, right? The skin of essentially the skin and maybe some other tissues, and a slightly higher value than that gives me the bone structure, right? So here is another example of mapping where you go from your data to a surface, right? So this is called an isosurface, and isosurfaces are one of the kind of the staples that is present in any visualization tool, right? It's like sorting, what sorting is to algorithms, right? This is the first algorithm that we teach in the visualization class, and there are thousands of papers written about isosurface extraction, just like there are thousands of papers written about sorting and how to do it fast and so on, right? So the ISO value here, so what is the data here? The data is 3-dimensional now, right? So over some block, you have, let's say you have taken a CT scan, so at every point you have some density value, right? Now, so that is my data. So it's a 3-dimensional function, right? Now I take a particular value, right? And I look at all points that have that particular value, right? So if the value corresponds to something, to the density, so I use density kind of loosely, right? But if that value corresponds to the density of the bone, then you get essentially the points that correspond to the bone, right, within that volume, right? And you connect them all together to give you a surface, okay? The surface can have many components, okay? So in this case, there is at least 2 components, right? So, so one can think of isosurface as a way of exploring your volume, right? You give me your CT data, and I give you a slider, and as you keep changing the slider, you look at different isosurfaces, right? Now the question is, which isosurface should I look at, right? Which is interesting? I don't know unless I go through each one of them, right? How do I know that when I quickly move my slider, I don't miss something interesting, right? So these are obvious questions, but very difficult to answer questions, right? There's no yes or no answer for this, right? That makes it difficult, right? One approach to solve this problem of finding interesting iso values is what we are going to look at, right? So in order to introduce that, let's look at simpler isosurfaces for synthetic or toy functions. So I'm going to look at what's called the height function over the plane, right? So you have a plane and you have some domain, in this case a sphere, right? It's a 2D domain, and the function is the height of every point above the plane, right? So that's the height function. So what will be my isocontours? What will be the isocontours? They will all be circles which are all horizontal, right? So those will be the isocontours. Okay, good. So this is just to develop some intuition, right? So how about a solid sphere? With the height function, you have 3D. It's a 3D function now, right? So the isosurfaces will be disks, right? Okay, good. How about again the solid sphere, but a function which is small at the center, right, and increases as you go out radially? What will be the isosurfaces? Spheres that are concentric, right? So concentric spheres, right? So you already see one issue with visualizing data using isosurfaces, right? Some of the isosurfaces may occlude the others. So I cannot just say I will display all the isosurfaces, right? In the earlier example, you could display, right, at least a good sample of the isosurfaces, but here again already you could not display all the isosurfaces, right? Because some of them occlude the other. Okay. But this is simple in the sense that the isosurfaces all had the same connectivity, right? So now I'm introducing the next term, it's going to be useful, right? Connectivity, so the spheres are all the same for me because they're all connected the same way. I can think of the sphere as like a balloon, and I'm not pinching a hole, right? I'm not kind of gluing anything. I'm just blowing it up, right? So the connectivity is the same. So a small sphere is the same as the big sphere, right? So nothing really interesting happens when I move the slider left to right. But if I look at another example, right, like the torus, this is called the torus, right? The domain, it's again, it's a 3D domain, it's a volume. Now if I look at isosurfaces, can you imagine what will happen as you go bottom to top? You will have one component of this isosurface, right? And something interesting happens here, right? The isosurface actually splits into two, right? And then merges back, right, into one. And then what happens? This one component goes away, dies, right? So it's not as monotonous as the previous example, right, where nothing significant happened. Here some significant events happened, right? Now the question is, can I capture this change in connectivity and represent just that change, right? So instead of displaying all the isosurfaces, can I track how the connectivity changes and display only that change in connectivity, right? So let's try to answer that question. Where exactly did the connectivity change? The inner edge, but no, but even before that. What happened here? There was nothing before that. Suddenly there was one component, that's a change in connectivity, right? So the connectivity changes at so-called critical points. You must have done calculus. So here's a connection to calculus also, right? Actually it's a very deep connection, we are not going to go over it much, but so there is a change in connectivity at the minimum, at the maximum where the component dies, and at the saddles, right? So these are all critical points, so these are all where the gradient becomes 0, right? But they are also related to how the connectivity of this isosurface changes, right? So connectivity study is a branch of mathematics called topology, right? So kind of the mathematics underlying the visualization techniques that I'm talking about today is actually a kind of a combination of calculus and topology, right? Just presented to you in pictures, right? Okay, so let's look at how we will track this connectivity change. And when you track it, we get a graph, which is called the Reeb graph. Okay, so let's go back to that torus example again, right? So as the isosurface kind of grows, right, evolves, right, you take every component of the isosurface and you shrink it to one point, right, and then you track these points, right. So initially you will have a set of points and then there is a change in connectivity, right. So you have two contours, right, and then so you have two sets of points and they merge again, and then and then this component dies, right. So what you get here is a graph, right, whose nodes are exactly the critical points of your function, right, and the arcs correspond to a set of, so this arc corresponds to a set of isosurfaces, all of which have the same topology, boring, right. So I put them all into one arc, right. So in this way I have abstracted out some information. Of course I'm losing some information, but I've abstracted the information available in this isosurfaces into a graph, right. So if you don't understand anything else, at least if you understand this mapping, I'm happy, right? So you got something out of today's talk. So of course it's called Reeb because of it's named after George Reeb, the mathematician who came up with this definition 50 years ago, right? But it's kind of come back to life just about 10 years ago, right, with an application. Okay. So if we don't like cycles, then we can imagine simpler domains. If the domain actually does not have a tunnel like this, then one can show that you don't have cycles, and then you have a tree, right? And in that case, the tree is called the contour tree, right? So here is a contour tree, right? As you can see, it's loop free, right? And that's actually the definition. But look at the nodes. The nodes are the blue minima, the red maxima, and the green saddles. And these nodes are either degree 1 or degree 3. Either a component is born, dies, leaves, or two components merge, or a component splits, degree 3, right? Okay, so now is a question, right? I was told that I can ask a question. So yeah, so here is a question. So how many trees can you have with, so here is 3 minima, 4 minima and 4 maxima. A little bit complicated. But if you have just 1 minimum and 4 maxima, how many contour trees can you have? How many different contour trees can you have? Good question. So good question means you should try to find the answer to that too. Can you have a tree with just leaves? No. So you should have saddles. How many saddles should you have? That's actually determined by this already. So maybe you write down this, and then as you go along in the slides, if some of slides are boring, you can work this out. So the question is how many, so maybe even not this, can you draw one tree, one contour tree which has 1 minimum and 4 maxima? So remember that this is the key clue, right? You need to have only degree 1 and degree 3 nodes. It's essentially a small exercise in, I don't know, isomorphism free trees, just tree drawing. That's wrong, but let's wait a little bit, right? Let's let people think, okay? I have another question also, which I will come back to at the end because it's a, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, I'll come back to it like again. So hopefully everybody got the question, right? At least draw one contour tree with a single minimum and 4 maxima. Okay. So in the rest of the talk, I'll probably not spend much time, just 5-10 minutes, right? I'm going to talk about how this contour tree or the Reeb graph serves as a abstract representation and helps you visualize your data, right? So we already saw this example, right, where this was actually the contour tree, and it helped me highlight regions in my volume, right? So it was essentially a sophisticated user interface, right? Much more sophisticated than your menus and kind of rubber band based selection and so on, right? A little bit more sophisticated than that. So which means you have to design algorithms to compute it, to interact with it and so on, right? And there are other, so this is not the only, the Reeb graph is not the only topological structure. There are many other topological structures and some of which we have worked with in our group, something called the Morse-Mail complex and so on, okay? So we will talk only about contour tree today. So what is crucial is this mapping between arcs and isosurfaces, right? So let's look at this animation again to understand that mapping. right? So that's how the set of isosurfaces is swept through the volume, and this is the mapping, right? We all understand critical points are the nodes, but each arc, the red arc, corresponds to a set of isosurfaces which have the same connectivity topology. So this is essentially a cylinder, right? It looks like a cylinder for a height function, but you can imagine how this will be for some other function. Okay, so this mapping is what is used in the earlier application. So you can use the Reeb graph to select arcs, and each arc corresponds to a cylinder, and that cylinder in this case looks like the colon, and it can be highlighted using sophisticated volume rendering techniques. So so you select different arcs. So in this particular case, 3 of them, maybe this guy, and then this this arc, red and green together, right? And highlight the corresponding volume. That exactly was done, right? So what kind of research questions do we answer, right? So here is one just question and quick answer, right? So you all have done some algorithms, so hopefully you can appreciate this. Computing the contour tree given your data is challenging, right? Computationally challenging. And if I have an algorithm, you have an algorithm, how do we compare our algorithms? By ways of running time, right? So we have designed so in our group we have designed the algorithm with the best known worst case running time for computing the Reeb graph, right? And one of the strategies that we have used is split and compute, which is just another term for divide and conquer. That's like a very, this is more down to earth. Split and compute, that's all, right? Strategy. And this was already a while ago. And this I mean, the way you show that is it's better is you compare with other methods. We showed it's 10 times faster. And for it, just to give you an idea, about a few million elements can be processed in just a few seconds, right? On a workstation, on a simple workstation. So this is a sequential algorithm. Then we designed a parallel algorithm, right? We figured out a way to re-characterize the Reeb graph so that it can be computed in parallel. And now with just 64 cores, which is actually available again on a workstation, right? We show that you can process 1,000 times more, right? So 8 billion elements, 8 billion points in 3 minutes. This was again about a year ago, right? And most important here is the memory, right? While you can keep increasing the number of cores, it's a little bit difficult to scale up the RAM available, right? And 8.6 billion points just to store the data takes so many gigabytes, at least, even if you take 1 byte per element, right? So if you think of floats and so on, this is about 64 gigabytes. But the entire algorithm uses only 10 gigabytes, right? And that's again doable, right? So these are the kind of constraints that we work with to design fast algorithms, right? This is just to give you a glimpse of a result, okay, without going into the detail. Another challenge is that the graph or the tree you compute can be messy. I will show you another video where it's apparent. So you want to generate a simpler version of the tree where you focus only on the important parts and you remove so-called noise, right? So you need a sophisticated noise removal algorithm. So now we will talk about some applications. Just flip through them one by one, just look at more pictures, right? So this is another application, the same, essentially another picture that illustrates the same application as before. I can improve my volume rendering by highlighting different parts. So in this case, 2 of the ribs are highlighted, which is very difficult to do in an intuitive way, right? But with the contour tree, this becomes easy. Here is a video that illustrates how the earlier picture was generated. So this is hopefully played at 2 times the speed, yeah. Okay. So this is the initial contour tree. It's messy, right? You will have to do some controlled simplification to look only at the interesting features. This is just the original volume rendering. Again, you cannot see anything out of it, right? So you can forget about this, that the interface was just a color map. How do you change the mapping to color and highlight individual arcs that give you the individual cylinders, and then you can assign different colors and different what are called different color maps to each one, right? So this is all captured at real time, right? But just played at 2 times the speed so that we can finish it quicker, right? So it's all interactive. The idea is to show that it's all interactive speed, right? And can be, so this can be a visualization tool on your workstation. Okay, so I just skipped to the end in the interest of time. So you can see the final volume rendering, which highlights the different regions, right? Okay. So we are not restricted to just spatial data. We can extend this to time varying data. So we all know about cyclones and hurricanes, right? An important problem here is tracking the eye of the cyclone or the region around the cyclone. Now, interestingly, we can just apply the Reeb graph as it is, but think of the domain as a 4-dimensional domain where time is just an additional kind of component, right? Just the 4th coordinate. And I don't show the graph here in detail because the structure is not so important, but this is the graph, right? And these are 4 time steps, 4 different time steps from the simulation. A few more minutes, 5 minutes, yeah. Okay. So here I select one arc from the Reeb graph, right? And that corresponds to, it won't correspond to a volume anymore. It will correspond to a space-time feature, right? It will correspond to a volume over time. So I automatically have the track of this eye. And not just that, I have a track of the region around the eye, which is also important because this tells me which parts are going to get rainfall and which parts are going to get the warm front and so on, right? So all this by selecting arcs from the Reeb graph. Okay, that's another application. Third application is to graphics. So in computer graphics, when you have polygonal models representing the different, right? So like parts of the body or I don't know, toys and so on, right? So this kind of polygonal meshes are obtained nowadays from devices like Kinect, right? An important pre-processing is to segment the entire domain into these parts. So the body and the tail and the fingers and digits and so on, right? And that interestingly can also be done using the Reeb graph. Okay, so that's an application, different application, not to visualization but to computer graphics, right? We can even use the Reeb graph to select interesting isosurfaces. So here is a scan from of the human head, right? And like I said, you can display isosurfaces, but how do you know which isosurface is interesting? And even if you know which isosurface is interesting, your entire feature may not be captured by one isosurface, right? So here is an application where they use the contour tree to highlight different parts of different features. Each one comes from a different isosurface, right? So the eyeball and the brain and the jaw and blood vessels and so on, all shown using in the same visualization by selecting different arcs from the contour tree. Okay, and we used something similar to this to also track clouds, right? Rain-bearing clouds, right, over time. Okay, so the final application is to detect symmetry. Right, we all understand what symmetry is, right? So symmetry is very easy to understand in the sense of geometry, right? So anything repeating, right? A repeating pattern is symmetric, right? So you can have translational symmetry, you can have mirror reflection, right? Symmetry or rotational symmetry, right? But you can think about symmetry even for distributions. You can think about a molecule and the electron density in the molecule and think about how this electron density distribution here is the same as this, is the same as this. Now, how do I capture that? So, by the way, do you understand why that is true? For organic molecules, right, you essentially have only a few types of atoms possible, right? Especially if you look at proteins, there are only so many so-called amino acids, right? So one thing about research is you get to understand a few, or at least you know a little bit about different subjects, right? And they become very interesting. So I know a little bit about amino acids and so on also. So there are only so many amino acids. So if you form a protein with all these amino acids, you are bound to have repeats, right, in the electron density distribution. How do I capture that explicitly, right? So again, the trick is to compute the contour tree, but now I have a tree, and I don't know, all of you are algorithms experts, right? You know how to find, you know what isomorphism is, right? You know how to compare graphs, so you compute similar subtrees by solving this as an isomorphism problem, right? Which is much simpler for trees. And once you find that this, or you think of it as a clustering problem, right? That's another take on this. And you find clusters, the yellow guys go into the same cluster, right? And the purple ones go into another cluster. And each cluster corresponds to a set of repeating patterns. So the purple guys here are all similar and so on. So let's look at a few other pictures that illustrate this symmetry extraction in more dramatically. So here are volume renderings from different virus, protein, again bacteriophage, another molecule, right, and so on. Now in all these cases, what you see on the top row is a volume rendering. Sorry, is there a question? Okay, I thought I heard a question. Okay, so on the top you see volume renderings, which is, to the naked eye, we can actually see that these are repeating patterns, right? But it's important for you to be able to recognize it and highlight them, right? And that is what is done here, right? The repeating patterns are all explicitly computed and highlighted. Again, all their underlying mechanism is using the contour tree, right? And you detect all kinds of symmetry. This is called dodecahedral symmetry. This is rotational. This is translational. This is also rotational. This is very interesting. It's called corkscrew symmetry, right? So kind of the symmetry that you see in your screw, right? The key is that all this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what symmetry you are recognizing. The algorithm is still the same, right? So that makes it quite powerful, right? So this is the fifth application to symmetry. So the technical term is symmetry aware transfer function design, but you can think another way to say that is symmetry aware volume rendering, right? So you render the volume by highlighting the symmetry in the data, right? Blank faces or still awake, that I'm happy about that. So this is just the last slide, again showing more symmetry, more interesting pictures, but from different applications. Buckyball, you must have heard about this, right? Buckminster fullerene, right? So this is from CFD, vortex flow simulation. This is again a protein. This is a combustion, no, I'm sorry, this is flow during a combustion in a fuel kind of a chamber, right? So in all these cases, symmetric patterns are highlighted, right? So here there is translational symmetry, right? You see three planes, they are all symmetric. Here you see these guys, they're all, each is a repeat of the other, right? All that structure is explicitly computed. Now, this symmetry is very inherent in nature, so which is why you want to highlight it, right? And if there is a break in symmetry, that's also interesting. So in this particular case, we found that there was actually a break. The earlier picture did not show this guy, all four of them, right? And then we were wondering what happened, right? So the simple, so we broke our heads. It was very difficult to figure out what happened, right? No bug in our code. Turns out that there was a bug in the simulation code, that generated the data, right? So visualization can help you debug even the data generation phase, right? Okay, so that's essentially the applications, and I'm done. But I don't want to finish without acknowledging all the work done by the PhD students, right? And master students. So Vidya and Aditya are master students. Nitin, Harish, and Dilip are PhD students who are smiling. They have graduated. Tala is still yet to graduate. But he's also a bit more serious than the others. So I want to thank, of course, people who have funded. So just to summarize what kind of things you may want to take away. Visualization is something simple that you have seen from your school days, but there are a lot of challenges. If you want to accomplish this for large data using your computer, the key is to do feature-directed visualization. Generate visualizations that highlight features in your data, right? And one technique that we saw was topology-based representations. Right? There are plenty of techniques available out there, plenty more that you can develop if you want to come into this area, right? A few problems that we looked at in our group for efficient computation, and we have looked at many applications from biology to cosmology to climate science, right? If you want to see some more videos, they are available on our YouTube channel, right? And now I have seen enough YouTube channels to say like, subscribe, right? And we also release our libraries. So we believe in open source software. So if you want some of these softwares just to try out for yourself, some are available as web servers. So you don't have to install anything, right? You just you look at example data just to understand what visualization is all about. And if you're really more into algorithm development like this, then you take some of our code libraries and improve them, right? Create a branch and then give it back to us. We'll be happy, right? So that's all I had to say for today. So thanks again for remaining awake, and I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thanks, Professor Natarajan, for a really insightful talk. So, questions.
Okay, so the answer comes out as so this is 3. Someone says 4 what? Let me get the answers 1 minute before I spill out the answer. So what did you say? 4? 5 what? 5 different Reeb graphs are possible. Okay. 1 is possible. 2 is possible. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0? Nobody says 0? You say 0. Okay. So why do you say 0?
There is 1 minima and 4 maxima, and connecting all the nodes, either we have to add new nodes or the degree will be more than 3.
Okay, so I don't know how you're going to distribute if there's any gift. So 2 is the correct answer. Yeah. That is true. Yes, you should look at. No, the labels go in. So minima have to be minima, right? So yeah, so it's a kind of okay. So yeah, I raised my hand, so I missed saying that. So 1 minimum. Let's draw that. Let's use maxima. 4 of them. So you said saddles, you are also correct. 3 saddles is correct. Okay. So 4 maxima. How did you get the 2 trees? Let me give them names. Capital M1, capital M2, capital M3, and capital M4. Then little m1. Okay? How did you get 3 saddles? This one, okay. But is this the only one? No, that's isomorphic to this. You can draw a what's called a leftist tree, right? One, 2, 3. Okay, that's all. So you can actually see that this is again something that you may want to take back home. M, number of minima minus number of saddles plus number of maxima let's do this by example, right? What is that here? 4, 1 or 2? It's 2 in both cases, right? Have you seen something like this before? Have you seen some kind of formula like this? Yeah, so for planar graphs, right? This is actually this is actually related to that. You can prove that this is true from that expression. Number of minima minus number of saddles plus number of maxima is always 2 for this contour tree. Okay, so which means that the number of saddles is fixed. Okay, fine. So that's essentially it. Yeah, we are out of time. I'm sorry. So
thank you once again.
Okay, and for me also. Thank you.